and ultimately work towards a better community for everyone. And so thank you all for joining us today. I am so excited for our conversation that will lead to even more important action. So thank you again. And with that, I'd like to pass it off to Jessica, who will introduce herself.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're calling from. Echoing Denise and Lynn, thank you all so much for being here with us, and we are excited to have this conversation with you all. We know you all are in your communities all across this nation dealing with these issues, as we are in a very different place as a country. And we are excited to see what comes from this, and we hope to continue to have these conversations with you in the future. So thank you all for being here with us.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So before we get started, we'd just like to touch on some housekeeping and agreements for engagement on today's call. So Jess, thank you. So just some light housekeeping. Right now we have everybody muted, and that way we can minimize the background noise, the echo, all of that. And we will have everybody remain muted throughout the call, but if you would like to speak up, to do that through the phone is *6, or you can use the little mute button in the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen. And the floor will be open for questions at the end of the panel, but throughout the discussion, please feel free to make use of the chat box. You can use your reactions too. There's thumbs up, there's the clapping emoji. There's a lot of options for engagement through Zoom. And this webinar is being recorded, and the resources will all be shared again at the end with everybody who has registered for this webinar. And for the rules of engagement or agreements, we just wanted to set this foundational understanding of discourse for today. The first one would be to be 100% present. I know that, especially as we're working from home, we're competing with life. We are competing with constant emails. Maybe you're caring for somebody, caring for children, and maybe you've got a million other things on your mind. But you committed this time to yourself, and so be 100% present and try to focus and really listen deeply to the conversation. And by listen deeply, we mean listen intently to what is said, listen to the feelings beneath the words, and really listen to yourself as well, and try to achieve a balance between listening and reflecting, and speaking and acting. The next rule of engagement we have is to suspend judgment, and by that we mean set aside your judgments. And by creating a space between judgments and reactions, we provide ourselves the opportunity to listen to each other and to listen to ourselves, and really gain more understanding of our perspectives, of somebody else's perspective. The next rule of engagement we have is to identify assumptions. And our assumptions are invisible, but they undergird our worldview and can inform our decisions and our actions. And so by identifying our assumptions, we can set them aside and again listen deeply to everybody's comments, to our viewpoints, and to really build that relationship. And sharing what you can carry is perhaps my favorite, just because it really establishes the understanding that, sometimes this conversation or some conversations we're in might be uncomfortable, or it might dredge up traumas or difficult feelings. And, some days we just don't have the mental or the emotional space to talk about it. And sharing what you can carry makes that okay. Having that understanding that, you don't have to share if you don't feel like you can. And related to that, we also would like to encourage you to speak your truth. Say what's in your heart, and trust that your voice will be heard and your contribution will be respected. And speaking your truth is not debating with, correcting, or interpreting what somebody else has said. And your truth might be different from my truth or from somebody else's truth, and that's okay. And we also ask you to own your truth by speaking in I statements. And the next engagement, or the next rule for engagement, would be to respect silence. And after somebody has spoken, it's okay to take time to reflect and just kind of sit with it for a little bit and fully listen. We don't need to immediately fill the space with words. And we'd also like to encourage you to create a brave space for yourself. And like I had mentioned, this can be uncomfortable for some people at some point in time, and that's okay. We honor each other's experiences. We're here to talk and to learn and to really think deeply about working together to dismantle systemic oppression and anti-Black racism. And to do that, you know, sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. And then speaking of discomfort, when things get difficult, turn to wonder. If you find yourself in disagreement with another, becoming judgmental or shutting down in like a self-defense mechanism, turn to wonder and really ask, you know, I wonder what brought them to this place, or I wonder what my reaction to this comment is teaching me. And I think that leads us to being open when we want to kind of shut down or, you know, kind of put up our walls, because again, this can be uncomfortable or difficult to talk about. And I would also like to leave some space if anybody has any other or additional agreements for engagement that they would like to bring up. Please feel free to enter it in the chat box. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Jessica to really get us started today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Really appreciate that. I'd like to once again thank everyone for being here and just talk a little bit about what got us here in this space that began to have this conversation today. If you know anything about CityMatCH, you know that we have been talking about issues of equity forever, but really talking about this, like white supremacy in our systems and how that affects how we do work at every single level. We've even begun a journey of doing an internal audit of how we're doing work and how we are portraying some of these things, whether it be intentional or unintentional. And then now with the face of everything that's happened today, America has been reawakened in a way. Many people have been. The things that we're seeing today are things that Black and brown people have faced forever. And this is not new to Black and brown people, but in the wake of everything that's happened with all of the lives lost, senseless lives lost, people are beginning to take a deeper look at how are we intentionally or unintentionally contributing to these systems, and how can we make sure that if we are contributing to these systems in any way, that we begin to undo that and begin to do the work that means undoing that. And so this conversation was sparked from folks reaching out and wondering what they can do to help their Black and brown colleagues, and then Black and brown colleagues not needing to carry that burden. So how do we then come together to create a collective way of moving everything forward, and moving forward in a way that is honest, in a way that really pushes us to work hard, in a way that really gets down to our core being, and forces us to do the work differently. If you have ever worked with Denise in any capacity, you will hear her say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And it is high time that we stop doing the same thing. Otherwise, we're not going to see anything different. So I pulled this quote that many of you all are familiar with from Angela Davis, just saying, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And that is the mantra we have to move forward with. We as a group, as a nation, as MCH professionals who have been talking about these things for forever, have to do this work differently in order to see any changes in our communities or amongst ourselves. So with that said, I would now like to turn it over to our panelists, and really quickly before they all, really quickly before they all come on, we did want to do a moment of silence. So if you all could please just join us in a quick moment of silence to remember all of our fallen brothers and sisters who have senselessly lost their lives, whether it be fighting against oppression, or reading a book, or going on a run, or sleeping in their home. We just want to take a moment of silence to remember them. Thank you so much. So now, before we turn it over to our moderator and panelists, I just want to do a quick overview. You see all of their lovely faces here, but they're all on the call as well, so you'll see them. This panel session will be moderated by Misty Wilder. We also want to acknowledge the lands from which each of these presenters are coming from. And so you'll see each of those lands noted right under their name. Misty hails from the land of the Kickapoo, Comanche, and Wichita tribes. Rose Anderson Rice in the St. Louis area is from the land of Kickapoo, Osage, and Miami tribe. Kiko Malin, and she is in the Alameda County area. She's from the land of Ohlone and Chochenyo tribe. We have Angela Newman White, who is from the land of the Erie tribe, and Richard Stacklin, who's also from the land of the Erie tribe. They are both in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. And I will now turn the floor over to Misty Wilder to get us started. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion, Action Against Racism. And so today we will have very good conversation. We have talked as panelists, and I'm excited to share this opportunity with such great individuals. So we'll get started. And so we will start with each person introducing themselves, and they will tell you their name, their organization, and their role, and what work they have done as an individual or organizational level to better understand what it means to be anti-racist. So we'll let Rose Anderson Rice start with the introductions.
Thank you, Misty. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As you see on the screen, I'm Rose Anderson Rice. I'm Deputy Director at Generate Health. My pronouns are she and her. Our organization is not a health department. We are a community-based small nonprofit, and we're in the maternal child health space and have been for 20 years. On our journey to becoming an anti-racist organization, first we went through a training in 2017. Our board, our staff, it was facilitated by Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. And the training itself was called Understanding and Analyzing Systemic Racism. This is an in-depth 2.5-day training that opened our eyes to institutional structural racism, unlike anything I'd seen in the past. And from there, then led our organization to, through strategic planning, change our vision for our organization as well as our mission. And our vision now is that St. Louis will achieve zero racial disparities in infant mortality and maternal health, which is our space. And our new mission is that our organization will inspire and mobilize the St. Louis region to advance racial equity in pregnancy outcomes, family well-being, and community health. And we've been doing our own work. I am thrilled to hear that CityMatCH is doing an internal audit, because so is Generate Health. We are specifically working with Crossroads on a year-long audit of our policies, our procedures, and our practices, recognizing that as well-meaning as we are upholding in some way white supremacy. And so we want to dismantle that system internally. And so we are taking an in-depth look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and specifically looking at our practices, because our policies and procedures may seem well-meaning, but how that turns into practice is really where we're finding the culture of uplifting white supremacy and oppressing Black and brown people. And we want to make sure that we're not doing that as an organization. In addition to that, our organization is a part of 20 other organizations in the St. Louis area that are part of a racial equity roundtable that is being facilitated through Forward Through Ferguson, which is an organization that was created to uphold the work and the calls to action of the Ferguson Commission, which was put together because of the death of Michael Brown Jr. And this organization is bringing all these institutions, 20 of us together to really have an accountability space for our institutional leaders. And it is the leaders that they want at the table. And specifically, you have to have at least one person of color, Black or brown person, who's part of your leadership team participating in the roundtable. And this is helping the leaders to practice applying racial equity lenses in our community institutions, and these institutions all have a shared commitment to racial equity. So we have been meeting, we just started the second cohort last month. And again, this is a year-long process. So I'm super excited about the work that's going to happen. We're gonna look at case studies, and they also make you really look into your organization and what your organization is doing around racial equity. And we're holding each other accountable for what we say we're going to do. So it's one thing, everybody now in St. Louis, because of Ferguson, is talking about racial equity, and this one thing to talk about racial equity, and it's something completely different to do something about achieving racial equity. And so that's what we're trying to do now. And then I just want to leave this piece, as our previous board chair, Rebecca Bennett, always says, systems and markets must work equally well and behave in ways that support all families to ensure disparities will no longer be predicated or predicted by race. Thank you, Misty. I'm complete.
Thank you, Rose. So now we will ask Kinko to introduce herself. Kinko? I don't think we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear? Yeah, great. Okay. Wow. So first of all, I just have to say to everyone, thanks. There's so many people on this call. It's amazing. I just got on because I couldn't, because there were 300 people and there wasn't space for me, but I managed to get in. I've had a really discombobulated morning where my computer kept crashing. I had to get in the car and race to my office. So I'm here in my office with my computer working, trying to take a deep breath. So just bear with me as I try to piece myself together here. And I just want to really thank everyone for setting this off on such a good tone, and Ms. Rose for your beautiful presentation just now, so concise. I will not be that good, but I will try to say a few things right now. So I'm Kiko Mallon. I'm the Family Health Services Division Director for Alameda County Public Health Department in Oakland and in San Leandro, California, Ohlone land, as was said earlier. And it's hard to think about what to focus on and what to say when we have so little time. And when we were preparing for this, we talked about how we could easily be on the phone with all of you for days talking about these issues. Issues that have been at play for centuries, as we all know. You know, folks of color have been experiencing the things that are in the news in big ways in the last couple of weeks, ever since the dawn of time in this country. And now it's coming to some recognition for people who haven't been paying attention, and I think that's good, as others have said, but we have a long way to go. All that said, I think and I'm not sure if I will have time to talk about this a little bit more later, but just to say that you know, I'm a white person who's been in this work for a long time. And I think that when I first came into this work, I thought of I've completely met the definition of a well-intentioned white person who was nice and worked with a lot of people from different backgrounds and tried to sort of, you know, be inclusive and, you know, plan programs that listen to feedback from folks in the community. But I think I really didn't understand what it meant to be a white person in this work. And I'll say that I work with mostly women of color. I run a division of 220 people, and the vast majority of them are women of color. We have many middle managers who are folks of color, and in our public health department, we also have lots of leadership of color. Our public health department director is a Black woman. Our health officer for many years was a Black man. We have other leaders who are also in our other agencies who are Black women. And that's all amazing and incredible, and it really makes a difference. But I think I didn't understand how I, as a white person, kind of fit into this work and could really do this work in a genuine and meaningful way until I went through a training that CityMatCH put on, which was the Racial Equity Institute training. And it's a 2-day training, you know, kind of what Rose said, something really intensive, really, it's in-depth. And what it really did for me was to allow me to understand the history of our country, because you know that we don't teach that stuff in school. We don't talk about the Tulsa Massacre. We don't talk about the origins of the racial hierarchy in this country that still exists today. And to see the embeddedness of racism in our society, and how I, as a white person, have benefited from that, and still benefiting from that, and have for the last 50+ years, something that I did not realize for so long, just shifted my thinking in a way that kind of transformed how I view the work and how I view the folks of color that I work with. It's almost hard to put it into words, but it was just a complete shifting of an understanding of, oh my God, what have we done? And how I have benefited from the things that I've done, that people who set this country up have done, and that I need to acknowledge that. And that I may not be responsible, like my relatives didn't own slaves, but I'm not responsible for that, but I'm responsible to this system that benefits white people, this white supremacist system that I have benefited from. I need to acknowledge that. I need to locate myself in this work, talk about that, and lead with that in everything that I do. And through doing that, I think the folks of color that I work with acknowledge that I understand the dynamic, and I listen. I used to think, you know, I remember that I used to hear from people, folks of color, oh, this person said this thing to me, and oh man, I felt really disregarded, and it felt really racist. And I would think to myself, oh, that seems kind of sensitive or oversensitive, because I didn't have the context. I didn't realize what it was like for people of color to experience this kind of stuff on a daily basis and what that does to people. So having a deep understanding, really listening and validating the experiences of people of color, and in particular, Black people, and in particular, Black women that I work so much with, has really transformed my vision. So that's kind of my philosophy, there we go, behind everything. And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk more about how we put that kind of shift in perspective into action, into programs, how you really develop an anti-racist approach to your work. It isn't about simply being not racist, you know, not saying racist things, or being inclusive, or planning programs for people of color. It's not just about that. It's about interrupting racism, interrupting the white supremacist system that so many of our county health departments are built on, and doing that in an integrated, meaningful way every day of our lives, and not just occasionally at a meeting or through a program that we set up, but making it integrated into our work in an ongoing fashion. So I'll stop there and pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kiko. Also, next we have Angela Newman-White. If you would introduce yourself, please.
Hi, yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share. Well, Richard and I share our experience, and myself share my experience in Cuyahoga County, which is located in Ohio. We are the largest county in the state. And so my role at the health department is to basically coordinate a number of maternal and child health programs and services. So as a grant supervisor, I basically work at a policy systems level, programmatic level, research data, kind of try to put it all together and improve opportunities for women and families, primarily Black women and families in our community, to have healthy birth outcomes. Throughout my tenure at the health department, well, I've been in this field for about 15 years. You know, having an anti-racist lens, initially coming into the work as a biracial woman, a woman of color, with a Black father and a white mother, now raising a Black son, I was afforded different, I would say, benefits from being somewhat ambiguous. People kind of don't know what I am or what I represent. But once I had my son, I really realized the Black experience and the difference between my life, what my life had been like growing up, the way that people perceive me, and now how I have to, on a day-to-day basis, fight for my son. At the health department, I think it's really important that we have been going through what we call a kind of a perspective transformation. Our health department, when I came there, I was the first person of color hired out from the outside as a part of management. The organization has traditionally basically hired folks that they knew, and everybody kind of got elevated through that way. And I was the first person to come in with an outside perspective and was able to kind of enlighten folks a little bit. We were able to do a number of years ago, I'd say it was back in like 2012, administer an assessment. I wanted to get a gauge on how the employees in the organization felt about race, racism, the work that we're doing in the community. And I was not surprised, but the leadership was surprised to see that the majority of the staff really had a lot of learning and growing to do. And so from that point on, we've, as an organization, established, it's not the class committee, which it was formerly called, but really this network, the equity, diversity, and inclusion kind of component of the organization to ensure that, anti-racist policy systems, programmatic, the way that we do business is embedded. Our agency has served as the backbone for the HIP Cuyahoga movement, which is our health improvement partnership, Cuyahoga. And in partnership with the community, we have identified eliminating structural racism as a social determinant of health as one of the strategic priorities. And that was back in 2012. And so we've been really trying to work with not only other partner agencies, but directly with the community to ensure that folks get what's really happening. And we're not focusing just on the outcomes and the data, but really the why. Why is it that Black women in our community are 3 times more likely to lose their baby? We know that they are, but we need not only our white leaders, but also our communities to understand the impact of communities, resources, policies, and systems on our opportunities to be healthy. I think I'm done with my intros.
Okay, thank you, Angela. And so our next panelist is Richard, and so if he would introduce himself.
Thank you, Misty. Hello, I'm Richard Stacklin. I'm a data analyst at the Cuyahoga County Board of Health and work with Angela in the maternal child health world, where I guess our work ties together is the work with EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is the fact that I was inaugural co-chair with a colleague to try to push the agency to move forward. Because I gave the presentation on the data that Angela talked about, and it was interesting how many people came up to me to say, oh, you're trying to get rid of white people at the agency, or we have the exact number of Hispanic employees, so you're not suggesting we have more Hispanics. And it was really interesting how many people came up to me and thought that I was targeting different racial groups, and I was just presenting the data. And so it was a eye-opening moment for me to understand how race is such a strong component of how people feel day to day and the work that we're doing. I know that for me as a data person, I really try to use data to explain. And so after that presentation in 2012, I took a step back. I started learning about redlining and how all those historical policies really influence where we are in Cuyahoga County, and really try to help people grasp that it's not personal choice, that the systems have been set up unfairly. And me as a white male needing to recognize that white males established these inequities. And so really trying to get other people, especially white people, to understand these inequities that we see and how do we move forward to improve the dreadful inequities that we see in infant mortality and other issues. In 2018, as a part of EDI, we actually got the agency senior management team to put EDI as a part of our strategic plan for the agency, which we're happy to see that one of our our core principles is to use the EDI lens. And as a part of that we're wanting to improve our hiring practices, as Angela mentioned, as the first non-white management person, it's disheartening that we have not improved our hiring practices and reaching people the way we need to. And then in terms of just being anti-racist, I feel like sometimes white people in general have been silent it's happened, and they didn't really do anything to not allow it to happen. And so sometimes I feel like my role when I'm presenting is to kind of be the squeaky wheel and to be a loud voice to advocate for those that have been disenfranchised for so long. And so I really feel like I feel like I have a platform to be able to use data to explain to people these inequities and how do we go forward to improve it, so it's fair and honest and it's real. And so we improve the inequities we see, especially within infant mortality.
All right, thank you to our panelists for introducing yourself. And we'll get started. Just a little bit about how this conversation came about is after the George Floyd killing, several people had conversations, and some were saying, so white people were starting to speak up, and then so they were asking the question, what can I do? Or how can I help? And some Black people were saying, well, we don't need your help, or you're asking us to fix something that we didn't cause. So we thought it would be good to come together and show how everyone can work together. It's not just for the Black people to fix the system. Especially, we didn't create the problem, so we shouldn't bear the burden of fixing the problem. And so with that being said, I know that all of the panelists talked about how the system was set up and designed not for people of color. And so now Black is trending, as the young people will say. And so now how can we capitalize or work toward more of an anti-racist organization? So I know that, Angela, you did a survey. So could you tell us a little bit more about how that survey was handled, how it was given out, and if you would be able to share that with all of us at the end, when the talk is over.
Yes, so I'd have to look back to find the actual name of the survey, but we worked with a local organization here. I believe they were called, I don't think it was Everyday Democracy, but we engaged a local organization that kind of worked on diversity. And they asked me, well, how does staff feel about addressing diversity and racism within the organization? And I couldn't really answer because I had only been there for about a year. And so they proposed that we administer a survey to kind of get folks' perceptions and beliefs around race, racism, hiring practices, working with the community. And so we basically asked all of the staff to complete the survey. And our initial push for the survey, there was not a lot of participation. I believe at the time when I started, our organization was about 89% white and 11% non-white. I think we only had, I think there were about 6 Black employees. They categorized me as Hispanic, even though I never said I was. So I was a part of the 3 Hispanic employees. And so we asked people to fill out the survey. And our initial push, we had very low participation. And at this point, we're still trying to convince the leadership on how important it is to get folks to respond. And so they offered an incentive, which I'm embarrassed to say, and a jean day. They said, if you fill out the survey, you can wear jeans on a Friday or something like that, which was kind of disheartening, but we were able to get a higher percentage based off of the jean day. And the survey, we had presented at our State of the Board meeting the results. And, what surprised me the most about the survey was some of the honesty that I didn't think was going to come out of it from folks that were willing to say things like, this person only got the job because they were Black, or why do we keep having to hire people who aren't qualified, or why do we have to translate, you should learn the language if you live here. And that's just some people that were willing to say some things. Just imagine all the things people were thinking that didn't disclose this information. And so, for me, it just gave us kind of a starting point and a sense of urgency to not only provide, which it's not, we shouldn't call it cultural competency, but to provide more training and exposure to a community of employees that grew up with people that only look like them, now work with majority of the people who look like them, but are trying to work with people who do not, to kind of look at their role and how they can grow so we can hopefully make better progress in addressing what we are supposed to be doing, which is, overall population health. And so we can go back and I could see if I can find the results in the actual survey, and I would definitely be willing to share that with you all. Did I answer the question?
You did.
Okay. It's so weird doing it like this.
I know. It's just, it's just weird that a Jean Day was offered. Okay. But
right.
I won't go into that. So, and then we have, now let's talk a little bit. This question is for Kiko. I know a lot of times people are saying, especially our white colleagues, that they're allies. And, now everybody's speaking up, before, as one of the panelists said, that everybody was kind of on the sidelines, kind of quietly saying that they were allies. But now, most white people are coming out saying that they're standing with the Black community, that they're standing with their Black coworkers. So, Kiko, can you really talk to us about what it truly means to be a white ally in the work?
Yeah, let me see if I can address that. Before I do, or I think as part of that, I wanted to mention that I saw a comment in the chat box about how it's really important for white supervisors to recognize that they may very well undermine their folks of color that they're supervising, either consciously or unconsciously. And I think that I am absolutely certain that I, as a white supervisor of many folks of color, did just that. And it was partly because I didn't understand my own privilege and I didn't understand my own place in this work. And for, as I said earlier, coming to terms with that and really understanding that is what shifted my ability to do the work differently. I'm certain that I still do the same things. I think it's important that we recognize that all of us we're all swimming in the same water. We have all been raised in a racist society, regardless of the color of our skin, and that different people have obviously experienced that racist society depending on the color of their skin, but we are all living in that, and that sometimes we say and do things, white people in particular, that we don't realize. It's like we've been indoctrinated in a way of thinking that we have to unlearn, we have to see things differently. And so sometimes when I have other white folks that I'm working with that say things and it's really like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that, I have to realize that I'm arguing not with a person, but with a system of thinking that we've all been indoctrinated in, whether we know it or not. And so my approach to people that I work with is really just to really listen, not to judge, to understand that people of color have been subject to oppression for years, decades, centuries, and to have that lens in everything that I do so that I'm less likely to undermine a person of color that I'm working with, although I may still do it. And I let that person know, if I do anything that doesn't feel okay, I want you to tell me. And when that person tells me, I listen and I validate and I don't defend. And so part of being a white ally is doing that kind of work and modeling that kind of behavior. It's calling other white people who are not seeing what they're doing that's disruptive or not helpful in terms of working with people of color, doing it in a gentle way, trying to kind of, not be punitive, but have conversations. And it's about being more than an ally. It's about, people often talk about being an accomplice. And I know there are mixed feelings about that word because it makes it sound like maybe you're doing something wrong. But sometimes the idea of being an ally is that you're kind of there by that person's side and you're cheering them on or you're in it with them, but you're not like in the fight with them. And I think what we really need to do as white folks and as non-Black folks in particular is be in the fight. So, you go to jail with that person if something happens. You are in it. And if that person's not around, like if you're supporting folks of color, when the folks of color aren't around, it's just white people, you don't kind of like take a breath and just kind of relax. You keep fighting that fight all the time. It's something that you lead with in every context that you're in. It's because it's the right thing to do. It's not, what I worry about a little bit with what's happening right now is that it's kind of, in a sense, the thing right now for everybody to be jumping on this important stuff that's been raised up for all of us to look at. And I want it to be more than just a trend. I mean, this is something that we all have to do to fix our country, to ensure health for every human being who lives here. And we can't just pay lip service to it. So it's about being all in with your whole heart, and not just because it's something that is kind of politically correct to do. Being a white ally means having really hard conversations. It means looking at yourself and being willing to acknowledge, oh, I said and did a really stupid thing. Let me spend some time thinking about why I did that so I don't do that again. Let me unpack that thinking that went into my saying or doing that thing so that I learn from my mistakes and I don't do it again. And I can tell someone else, and so they can learn from my experience, not to perpetuate these sorts of things in our workplace and in our personal relationships with people. So that was a little bit of a long-winded answer. I hope it gave you something to chew on.
Thank you for that. And so you're exactly right, because language does matter. And we hear, especially now, a lot of people are saying, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, and things like that. And I think it may come from a humbling place. I'm not sure. I can't say yes or no. But for me, as a Black woman, I'm unapologetically Black. And when I show up as a Black woman, and you decide how you're going to interact with me based on my skin color. So we need to be clear that I want you to see color because it's part of my culture, it's a part of who I am. And so Rose, can you talk a little bit about, showing up as a Black woman in this work that has, as we're trying to do this anti-racist work, and being able to speak up and show up as your whole self as a Black woman?
Well, let me attempt to answer that, Misty. Thank you. Yeah, I think my biggest challenge is helping non-Black, non-brown people, white people, understand that I don't speak for all Black people. I don't have the same experience as all Black people. And so I can't be the person you use to learn from. I'm not afraid to share what I want to share, and I do that. And I'm trying to build more courage internally to call people out when I see stuff that isn't right. And I think, I too was sitting at where we were part of the Equity and Birth Outcomes Institute with CityMatCH, and I remember being in a training, and the presenter was talking about an experience she had in the mall, being waited on by a white person, and she was Black, she was with her Black friend. And I'm not gonna share her story, but I can share my story, because right after that, I left out and went to the Mall of America and went into a store. And as soon as I went in, it was no one else in the store but a white clerk. And she was folding clothes, and I walked in and she was like, "Hi, how are you? Can I help you with anything?" And I was like, "I'm just looking," which I was. And I just noticed as I walked around the store, she kept moving. So at first she was up front folding things, and then I moved to one side of the store. She moved with me, and she was fixing things around that rack. I moved to the other side of the store. She was fixing things around that rack. And what she may not understand, and a lot of other folks don't understand, that is considered a microaggression, because basically in that act, what she was telling me as a Black person is, I don't trust you. You're probably going to steal something from my store. I was dressed in a business suit because we were at a business meeting. It doesn't matter for Black people, whether you're dressed in a business suit or jogging pants or whatever. It doesn't matter for us, because the assumption based on our skin color is that we're going to do something bad. I actually was going to spend some money in that store. I was just looking around to see what I wanted to buy. So as she continued to do that, I walked right on out the store, because what you're saying to me is my money isn't important to you. Basically, she wanted the money, I'm sure. But the reality is, that microaggression pissed me off. And I should have said something to her. I should have said, "Why are you following me?" She would have said she probably isn't following me or whatever, because now it's unconscious behavior, because this is in the culture. I put this in the chat, like we've all been assimilated into this culture of white supremacy, right? And as a Black person, it is hard to bump up against this. I think once you go through an enlightening training, or you have someone in your family who has been talking to you and shared open, you know something's going on, and a lot of Black people can't name what it is. Well, you know, I feel like now, as you talked about language being important, that I've been given the language to be able to name what's going on. And the reality is, I too am a statistic in that I was pregnant and lost my baby. So this microaggression too, I realize now, has had an impact on my body and my ability to carry a child to term. And folks are like, oh, but I'm a white person and I had a miscarriage too. Yeah, I understand. And it's horrible, regardless you're Black or white. But what we're saying is there are things that Black people have to deal with on a daily basis that you just don't have to. You can walk in a store, the clerk will ask you if you need any help, and she'll continue to fold her stuff up front until you say you need help. And so I just think that it is up to us, us being everybody, to recognize when we're saying and doing things, because now we just kind of say stuff. And again, back to this whole racial equity being the buzzword, what does racial equity mean to you? Like, how would you know that we've achieved racial equity? And I just wanted to really quickly share a definition from Ford through Ferguson that I think, in terms of St. Louis, it's perfect. It says, racial equity is a state in which outcomes cannot be predicted by race, when systems work well for all people so that disparities are closed and all residents, regardless of their race or their zip code, have justice and an opportunity to thrive. And in St. Louis, you could be in one zip code and less than 4 miles away have a desperate outcome because you're in the wrong zip code. And that is not racial equity. Thank you, Misty. I'm complete.
Thank you for that. And we talk about this journey, and Rose, you gave some, examples that most Blacks have experienced, being in a store and being followed, and, microaggressions that we experience day to day, even in the workplace. Even with dealing with most of us that are in the infant and maternal and child health world, we know that Black women are dying and Black babies are dying, but we still sometimes experience microaggressions when we're just doing the work, simply advocating for Black women and children. And so I want to talk a little bit about our journey in this work. And Angela, I know when we talked before, you shared a story about how being biracial, how sometimes not being Black enough, or sometimes, now I'm not going to share your story. I'll let you share it.
Okay. So thank you, Misty. Let me, I guess, preface this by saying, like, as I mentioned in my introduction, I by no means have grown up with the Black experience, but I identify with Black people because my family's Black. My father's Black, everybody on my daddy's side is Black and my mom's side is white. And so in this work, I've always identified as a biracial woman, primarily because, growing up, the whole one drop rule, there's this pressure to pick one side or the other. But my mother, as a white woman, would always say to me, well, what about me? You can't just say you're Black because you do have a white mother. So I'm like having this aha moment, like, okay, I claim and embrace this multicultural, mix of what makes Angela. But when it comes to doing this work and addressing racism, the challenge that I often have is I understand the power behind Black women, Black families, Black people fighting the system, because this is impacting our Black community. But when I approach primarily a homogenous group of Black individuals, sometimes I'm not accepted because I work at the health department, which is a primarily white department, but I also don't, the perception of me based off of how somebody, they look at the color of your skin and they have these judgments and premonitions and they just assume whatever they do about you. I'm not Black enough to represent the Black community. And in my heart, I am representing the Black community, but I get it. And so I try to be sensitive to the experience of someone who is all the time perceived as a Black individual versus me, who's sometimes perceived in that way. I've also been the token person of color in a room, so somebody can check off a box that they've had some diversity in their group, and I can't put it out there now because I might get in trouble, but I've just been told that I've personally been told that I've checked a box before for them. And that's why I'm at a table. And it's like, and I'm not qualified. You only put me in this position because you didn't want an all white group. And so my struggle is always trying to prove my Blackness, my caringness, my compassion, and need to fight for what's right. And so I believe that in this work, we are stronger together just because we all have our different strengths and experiences, which together can draw that picture to convince and inform this perspective transformation that we need. People need to care, because if they don't care, then we're not going to get anywhere. And so, I mean, I can go on and on about all of this, but my son is 6 years old, and I think that, I never realized, I knew how bad it is for Black people in general, but my parents were divorced, and so I kind of grew up with my mother most of my life. When I got married and my son, started to go to school, that's when I really saw it doesn't matter where you live, you got this two parent income, great school system. It really is about what people think about you just by how you present. If I have brown skin, my kid has labeled aggressive, ornery, he's been accused of sexually assaulting someone. I mean, it's insane. And he's, was almost expelled from preschool. I'm in this fight like everybody else because I want to see what's right. And I want people to accept me. I was even nervous about the picture for the panel because it's super old, right? So that picture was taken in 2011. And I'm like, are people going to think that I'm white? And then I have to check myself and be confident in who I am and what I represent, because I know that, I'm doing this for the right reasons, and I'm in this because it matters, not only to me, but my family, my community, and all of us. So that's.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, and that's, again, I'll go back to showing up as our whole self. I mean, sometimes we do question, how we show up, because are we going to be judged? If I talk with my hands, am I being too aggressive? If I get too passionate, oh, she's this angry Black woman, when I'm just talking to you, simply talking to you, because you're going to know when there's some aggression, because I'm going to have different language and different body movement. But right now, I'm just talking to you out of passion. So just thinking about those things. And we have a couple of more questions, and then we'll go and open it up for a question and answer from the participants. But I wanted to talk to Richard a little bit. If you could talk to us about, a lot of times people say, oh, data, you can make data say whatever you want it to say, or questioning the data when it's presented, especially when it's presented with race involved. And so can you speak to us a little bit more about how you've handled that when presenting data?
Sure, thank you, Misty. So yeah, what I try to do is, honestly, I try to use more hardcore statistics, because sometimes I've heard some people talk about, well, qualitative data, it's not real, which it blows my mind, because it's the experiences of people that have experienced, like what Rose and Angela was talking about, their experiences. That's real, and that's very valuable. So sometimes, like, especially if I'm talking to more of a science-based group, I try to use hardcore statistics. So one example I did was I looked at our social determinant of health data, and I looked at 9 indicators, and I made it into a regression model, and I compared it to our infant mortality, and the correlation was more than 0.80, which is extraordinarily high. And the main factor as to why there was high infant mortality in a given area in our community was based off of race. That was the #1 indicator. And so when people see like these statistical models showing the data, it's not me making something up. It's me providing evidence as there's a real problem in our community. And so I really try to use hard statistical tools and models to show that. Another example that I often try to do is look at mapping. Something that we actually kind of stumbled upon our work was, we didn't realize our labor and delivery hospitals, there was a large discrepancy. We had, out of 7 hospitals that deliver in our community, 5 were on the west side, where predominantly our white people live in our community, and only 2 on the east side. And what makes that very damning is the fact that we have 50% of people on the east side that deliver babies and 50% of babies on the west side. And within the last 15 years, there was 2 hospitals on the east side that closed in our predominantly African-American communities. And the other argument I made, people said, well, it's an economic issue. There's no way that they could, support it financially. And so then I went back to the data. I saw that the 3 community hospitals in the white area had 1,450 births a year. On our far east side, where there's no labor and delivery, there was 1,450 births. And so I made the economic argument, well, if we can have 3 hospitals supporting these white people for 1,450 births, why can't we have at least 1 hospital that give the same number of births in this community that's largely African American? And so I really try to use numbers and statistics, and then I try to use maps to put in people's faces to see the large inequities and disparities that we see. Because I think the picture tells 1,000 words, and the statistics behind it, it's hard to argue because that's what's being used in our community. So that's what I try to do.
All right, thank you, Richard. And so now we had a couple of questions to come in prior to the today, and so we wanted to address those. And it says, someone sent in and said, I know several nonprofits who have challenges supporting and retaining African American staff and their African American program participants. They are in the process of seeking some consultants to help their agencies do better. What suggestions can you provide these agencies who are only now realizing that they need help, even though they have been years of problems that need to be addressing? Any of the panelists can answer that. So just to go back over the question again, is that there's nonprofits that are losing their African American staff and their participants. And it says, what suggestions can you provide these agencies who are now only realizing they need help, even though there have been years of problems that need addressing? Any of the panelists can answer.
So Misty, I'll just share, as we are doing our work, looking at our policies and our practices and our procedures, we're also looking at how we recruit, where we recruit talent. And I think so again, well-meaning folks, as Kiko said, if you have an environment that doesn't support or is comfortable for Black and brown people, they will show you with their feet. If they're unheard, if you're upholding these practices which belittle Black staff, which I don't know. It feels like, to me, some of the questions that we get asked in this audit that we're currently working in really does challenge you. It's like, how are you upholding white supremacy? How are you oppressing Black people, or and people of color, period, in your organization? And we're looking even at small things like our holidays that we pay for. We have 10 paid holidays throughout the year, and everybody gets those holidays off. Well, we also have staff who are diverse and don't celebrate, like some don't celebrate Christmas, but that we get Christmas off and Christmas Eve off. But there hasn't been a look at, can folks switch days? Like, if there's another religious holiday that they celebrate, can they work Christmas and get that religious holiday off, or not, and not have to take their personal time to do that? How do we be more inclusive in the types of holidays, that are a part of our culture? And these We're just like, oh, everybody gets off for 4th of July. Well, there may be folks who don't celebrate the 4th of July. They may be opposed to the 4th of July and would prefer to have Juneteenth off. But just those types of things, looking at all of these policies and practices that we have as an institution that we just have had and never looked at the implication of it. And so we've been looking at a lot of stuff through a racial equity lens, asking ourselves, who's benefiting from this staying the same? Who's being oppressed by this strategy or this intervention or this policy? And it takes you doing the work. It's not talking about the work. It's actually doing that. Somebody on your team taking the time as a group with leadership buy-in to take a look at how you are as an organization. There's no magic pill for retaining African-American staff that I'm aware of, other than creating a safe space where they feel like their work is valued, that you're doing that publicly and privately, that you're sharing power publicly and privately. I'm deputy director at Generate Health, so I'm second in command. And my executive director, we share power. She is not like lording over me. Like, we talk about stuff. And then it's a safe environment. As a Black person, I can say, hey, you know what? When you said this to me, here's how I felt about that. And then she checks herself, right? She has said, please, I'm learning as everybody else, and I am going to make mistakes. Call me on those. At least let me know that those are happening, so then I can make changes. So that's the other part too. I'm complete. I'll let someone else answer as well.
Thank you for that, Rose. And we know that that when we say share the power, that doesn't mean only give me the power when you're in a room full of Black people and you need a Black face. That's not sharing the power. So a lot of times what happens is we'll say we're sharing the power, but it's only when you're in the room and you need a Black voice. So that's not sharing the power. Sharing the power is all the time, equal times, and not just when you need a Black voice or a Black face to show up for a meeting. And to answer that question as well about the nonprofit, I'm on a board of a local nonprofit here in Fort Worth, and in one of our board meetings, the CEO said that they didn't get funding because the board was not diverse enough. And so they went on this whole campaign to find Black and brown people. And so I said to her in the board meeting, I said, so you will go after recruiting Black and brown board members, but you're not willing to change the services to reach Black and brown communities? And so she was like, well, and so she couldn't really answer, but I told her as a board member, I will be holding you accountable. That program will be changed. You're not going to just fill the board up with Black and brown people so that you can get the money and not actually change services. And so another question that came in was, every time the issue of racism arises in mass media, it is a reminder of how deeply ingrained racism is within the systems in which we live, work, and play. Thinking about language, the words that we speak and write, our perceptions, and the way that we interact with one another. What are small changes could be helpful to make in our everyday lives to shift the needle of racism? So we talked a lot about our work environment, but what are some things that we can just do in our everyday lives that we can shift the needle on racism? Any panelist can answer that.
I can. This is Angela. So in our individual lives, I mean, again, I'm in this unique scenario to where I do have a whole family of Republican, like, white people. And I find myself in a lot of situations to provide some teachable moments and to enlighten and to explain to people. I've really addressed their ignorance. I think that in many cases, especially for when you're around white people and there's comments made and, you know, and giving their explanation to why, you know, a traumatic event has occurred, it's important that we talk about again, what Richard talked about, the whole overall systemic implications of decisions and things that are happening, that it is not an individual's fault. And providing that historical context, I think, can address a lot of ignorance, because my family is the type of people on my mother's side to say, I don't see color. You know, I don't see color. Why do you always want to talk about this, Angela? And, you know, it's white people don't see color because color doesn't affect them as an individual. And so I think that making sure that we use opportunities, even though it can be exhausting and everybody doesn't want to be that person to explain everything, I find it very important to enlighten the people in my community and my family on my mother's side, the truth behind what's really happening, and try and encourage them to take a more active role to addressing, you know, really the system as a whole. And then two, we have to continue to learn. Everybody doesn't know everything. And I don't claim to be an expert on American history, Black history. I'm not the expert, but I have taken the last 5 years, you know, to really dive deep into, you know, all of when we talk about the Tulsa Massacre, and of course, Richard mentioned, you know, the redlining, you know, the impacts of the GI Bill and all of these things on overall this wealth gap that we see today. Because you have to have this information to basically like shut those people down that have all these assumptions, but you can't argue the facts. And so I think it's important that we continue, everybody, to educate ourselves, not only for our own personal growth, but so we can address folks when they come at you with basically with nonsense.
Thank you for that. And so we know several people have asked for Hannah's question to be answered. And I don't know if Rose, if you want to come on and answer it, but it says, what advice do you give for furthering the agenda of dismantling white supremacy in an area that is 90% white / serves a white population? The excuse is there is no Black people in the area. And I know that's her question, but I also want to add in being in a southern state like Texas as well.
So I just put in the chat, I feel like you have to plant seeds, and where there are already seeds planted, you have to water those seeds. And what I'm talking about is around racial equity. Again, what we've been talking about is it's not just okay to talk about this and be an ally when you're in a room full of Black folks or brown folks. Like, you yourself have to figure out how you're going to further this discussion and make changes in all the spaces you are. If you are white, you have access to spaces sometimes that Black and brown people do not have access to. And so you have to carry the mantle. You have to carry the water for this discussion. And again, it's not just about serving Black people. I put in here, regardless of whether or not your organization serves Black people or not, or brown people or not, your organization is part of a system in the United States. Therefore, you have work to do. And so I stuck in here as well, you know, if you're looking for data or language or how I talk about this, or really, what are you saying? To me, it's all about perspective and how we have been, and when I say assimilated to see this country and the work that we do through a certain perspective, how we view Black people through a certain perspective, which gets, you know, programmed through news media, social media to us all the time, whether or not, and you're like, yep, there go those Black people again. They're lazy. That's why in Missouri, we can't pass Medicaid expansion, even though more white people are going to benefit from it, because there's this perception that it's going to give services to Black people who are lazy and won't go to work. Okay, so there's a series, it's called The Power of an Illusion. If you have not seen that, it's really talking about race, which is a construct. Like, underneath the skin, we're all the same. But this racial construct was designed in the United States on purpose. And so these DVDs, and I think it streams as well, it really gives you the language, and it gives you a better understanding historically as to why things are the way they are. It does talk about the GI Bill and housing and how housing segregation happened. It talks about redlining. It talks about even folks who wanted to be identified as white because the white standards were this in the United States. And then even if you were a non-white and you met all these standards, the standards would be changed so that you could not be declared white. So if you have not seen it, please do, because it does change your perspective about what's going on, how it's been going on historically, and why we're bumping up against this system that, as Jessica shared at the beginning, we have to change. We have to change. We can't just talk about it. We don't need another book club. We don't need another discussion, a round table to just come together, read a book, talk about this, and then we go on our merry way. We have to change how we think, how we talk, how we process. We have to change that. Thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely. We have to change it. It's up to us to change it. And I often want to just ponder the question for everybody to think of, especially our white colleagues. What would you do if it was happening in your community and your family? So you wouldn't just sit back and say, I don't know what to do. You would kind of jump in and figure out what to do. And so that's what, as a Black woman, I tell the white people that ask me, well, what do I do? What would you do if it was happening to you? If you had to have conversations with your son or your daughter that you can't wear a hoodie and go buy Skittles, that you can't stand outside the store and sell certain things because you may end up dead, that you have to make sure you know what to do when you encounter the police. So if you were having to have those conversations, what exactly would you do? You wouldn't be waiting on someone to give you a solution. You would jump in there and do it. So we know what to do, is that it's a matter of what amount of risk are we willing to take. So I take a lot of risk every day as a Black woman in a white system that says that this is how you're supposed to act, but then you're serving Black people. So I have to speak up and say, for our communities. So I'm risking it every day. So I want to ask our white counterparts, are you willing to take that risk along with me? That it's not just me sitting at the table and everybody look at me for the answers, but are you willing to step up and call it out too? And that we dismantle together and not just expect the Black people to start dismantling. Use your white privilege to dismantle the system through policy and procedure. That's another way. You are there when you make policy and procedures. Make sure that you're using your white privilege at that time to make policy when you're making policies and procedures. We don't want to take it away from your privilege away from you. We just don't want you to use it against us. So when you're thinking about dismantling the system, that's one way. When you are in the position of power, how do you use that power to dismantle white supremacy system? So our time is winding up, and I'm not sure if Lynn, if we've answered, or Jessica, all the questions, or do we still have some questions to answer from the chat, but also wanted to give the opportunity for the panelists to have the last comments, at least 1 or 2 minutes on, now that we have this opportunity, everybody's talking about race in the MCH world, what can we do now to further build this momentum of dismantling the system in the MCH world? So do you want to look at the chat first, or before they give their final thoughts?
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead, Jess.
No worries. So we had another question, a couple more questions come in, and we might be able to get to one of them. The first question came in and is asking, I'll read some background to let you know. So in thinking about what Rose posed, sharing that Black or brown folks won't stay in a space that they are not safe or valued. This was in response to a question about Black staff being lost at a nonprofit in their community. And in their community, they're seeing lots of brown people not having this choice In each socioeconomic class, I have seen brown people having to endure terrible, overt racist comments and microaggressions daily, but since they are the providers and have been taught that a job is a job, they stay for the money in order to provide for their families. In this situation, they are denying the racism that is in themselves in order to endure. So the question is, how do, or for those who may not have the choice to leave for very honorable reasons, yet aren't willing to be the disruptors, then what might be the solution in a situation that seems far gone?
That's a good question, and I know that happens a lot. And because racism is so pervasive, folks are just like, whatever, you know, I just deal with it and figure out how to move on. They're ignorant or whatever, or they talk about it at home. And again, it's impacting their health and well-being on a daily basis. And I think in those situations, you are trying to figure out, it's similar to the question the other person had around 96% white and no Black folks that they're actually dealing with. We need, again, some white allies, and I'm using that term loosely, to, when we say step into your privilege, folks hate that word privilege, because in their mind, again, perspective, privilege is, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I worked for everything I had to get. Nobody gave me anything. And we're not talking about that kind of privilege. We're talking about the kind of privilege where you can walk in the store and no one's following you around. That kind of privilege where you get asked to join a board because of your expertise, or you get to join the board because of your intelligence, or even sometimes your financial means. Whereas, as Angela shared or Misty shared, you know, we get asked to be part of the board because we're checking the box. Now I have a Black person on the board, or I have a person of color on the board. We even talked a little bit about how do you engage community members who, you know, have lived in you know, lived experience, and have them on boards and make it safe for them to be there. And a lot of times, you know, again, you're like, you think and hope that people are asking you to be there because of what you bring to the table, but you find out in ways that are repeated over and over that's not the case. I feel like it's sometimes for self-preservation, you know, Black folks still just take it and try to figure out a best way to deal with it. And part of that is we have to have someone who's helping us to be able to, you know, pull people out. I think white people, checking other white people is crucial in this movement of change. You see it, you hear it, check that person. Like, no, all Black people aren't like that, or all brown people aren't like that. Or, why are you saying that? Do you realize that this is part of the problem? Like, you have to find some courage within yourself to also help. And I'm sure there are other white folks in that organization, that nonprofit, who can speak up and say something about what's going on.
Yeah, this is Kiko. I was just going to build on what Rose said in answer to that question. I think that for folks in that situation, it's, you know, coming together, being able to validate that they're all experiencing this environment where they're having to, you know, put up with microaggressions and whatever it is. And then, you know, finding allies. I mean, if there are white people that are heading this organization that don't know what's going on, some of those white people may not be open, but maybe one of them is. And so if that group of people can find a white person who can listen, and they together can formulate, you know, do a book club, do some reading, get educated, educate that white person so that person really understands what's happening. And then there can be a trickle up kind of thing that happens where, if it's white, I'm assuming it's white leadership in this organization, or there can be, there has to be some tone set from the top that we will not tolerate this kind of behavior, that we as an organization want to become anti-racist. That means we have to listen, we have to disrupt. So those folks need to band together and find a way to move that message up to the people who are in charge. And I think the fact that we have this environment now where folks are more open or listening, it's a good time for that to be happening. That's it.
Jessica?
Oh. No, I wondered, Misty, if I could just say one other quick thing, because someone had asked a way long time ago about how health departments propagate racism. And I just was going to say that I think it's important to recognize how racism has had an impact on healthcare and public health. You know, if we think about people like J. Marion Sims, who was an OB who did ruthless experiments on Black women who were slaves without anesthesia in order to develop, you know, modern obstetricians and, you know, OBGYN science. That history is really important for people to know. Tuskegee was a public health department experiment on Black people who were given the, you know, everyone knows about Tuskegee. Anyway, there's a racist history to public health infrastructure, obviously, in our country and in the world, and it's important to recognize that and come to terms with that, and to see what the relics are still in the way that we do things. Looking at our hiring processes, you know, where are we hiring? What kinds of questions are we asking people? I mean, can we unroot kind of what we're valuing in terms of the questions that we ask folks when we're interviewing them, and are they rooted in white supremacist values? It's really good to take a look at your interview questions and completely retool them and think about what kind of message you're sending when you interview people. That might be part of why you're not getting as many folks of color as you might want to have working for you. Talking about equity in your interview, how that's something that you're going to be looking at, anti-racism as a platform in your organization, all those kinds of things we don't normally do. And I think that when we bring people on from the community, sometimes, you know, we say we want people from the community to work for us, and then we have them come and we give them a 1-week orientation, and then they're off on their own, and they may not have the background, they may not understand what it's like to work in a different kind of setting. We need to create environments that are nurturing for folks of color, and we don't often do that in public health departments. And then finally, I was just going to say that even here in Alameda County, where we have a lot of programs that are serving African-American families, for a long time, they were very segmented. It's like, oh yeah, we have these programs, they're well-funded, they're serving Black families, that's great. But the Black people run those programs and they're over here. And that's racist. I mean, it should be an integrated approach. We, as maternal child health professionals, want to ensure the healthy outcomes for all families, regardless of color of their skin, how much money they make, where they live. Then we have to think about an integrated approach. We have to integrate anti-racism and racial equity into all of our programs, not just say, oh, we've got programs serving folks of color, so check the box. We all have to be thinking about this in an integrated way, and public health departments haven't traditionally done that. So that's another way that we as health departments continue to perpetuate these racial inequities. I'm done. Just wanted to say that one piece.
Jessica, Denise, we'll turn it back over to you.
I'm sorry, Misty, I was speaking and my line was muted. But I was just saying, thank you, Kiko, for bringing that up. That was actually the next question I wanted to lift out for any of the panelists to take on. So thank you. Okay. And I know that we are getting close to end of time. And Misty, I know you wanted everyone to just say one final thing. If we can do it this way, if every speaker can take maybe 20 seconds to just let us know. There was a question that came in about balancing your humanity. So maybe just about 20 seconds to answer the question around how do you balance humanity and racial equity in your work?
This is Richard. I really try to focus on, like Misty mentioned earlier, imagine it was your child that passed away, or imagine it would happen to you. And so I try to, I have a brother who died as an infant. And so knowing the fact that in my community that Black babies are 4 times more likely to die than a white infant, it extraordinarily saddens and humbles me to realize that a certain group is so impacted. And so when I think about my work is I don't want anyone ever to feel the pain that my family felt from an infant death. And so I really try to remember the pain that my family feels, and I want everyone not to have that same pain, and to remember that I want everyone to celebrate their first birthday. And so I really try to remember that we're all people, and we all want to be happy and enjoy our lives and our families. And so I try to bring that to my work.
Thank you, Richard. If anyone else want to reply really quickly.
I guess really quickly, I mean, for me, there is no kind of balancing it. It's just the right thing to do. So I just want to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to thrive regardless. And I'm not even talking about just racially, but, sexuality, religion, all of that, gender differentials. I just want to make sure that we don't have these systemic and these ridiculous barriers, and then set these unrealistic expectations of this, happily ever after white picket fence. I just want everybody to have the same opportunity. And so I'm going to fight to the end.
Perfect, thank you. I don't mean to cut off the conversation, but we are at time, and I just want to respect what everyone has to do for the rest of the day. Really quickly, before we leave, Denise, did you want to just make a quick announcement about nominations?
I will, but there was a lot in chat. If you didn't catch at the very beginning, we said we anticipated that we knew we would not get through everything on this call. So we're planning some future calls. We've captured these questions. We will work to make sure that on future calls we address. I don't know that Richard was able to see. I know one that probably got us caught was that, and I know Richard well enough to know that in no way is race a risk factor. Racism is. So to make sure that everybody on the call understands that. And but that was a good point to make sure, because some people will look at that data and say, see, race is a risk factor, and we know it's racism.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry. So Richard, I can let you real quick, maybe 10 seconds, highlight anything you want to that. And then the slide is up. We do want to say that we are looking for nominations for the CityMatCH board. We couldn't not make sure that you all saw that. And thank you, everyone. And I'll turn it back over to Richard and then Jessica to wrap us up.
Yeah, so just real quick, so that's based off of a model working with CityMatCH and Michigan Public Health Institute that talks about the root inequities of the root cause of health inequity is based off of race, class, and gender exploitation. So race as a component of racism. So yeah, absolutely, it's not. There's differences in race genetically. It's the impact of racism. So yeah, no, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, just to echo Denise, thank you to all of our panelists for engaging in this conversation. Thank you to everyone who is on the call right now for engaging in this conversation and being with us through this. As Denise stated, this is the first of many conversations. We just wanted to begin this, and we really want to assist our membership and your partners with thinking about how we at the local level can begin to really work towards undoing racism at every single level. So we really appreciate you all for being here with us. Really quick before we all leave, because we've had these conversations, and if you are a Black or brown person, especially, these conversations have a toll. We're not fighting racism without it taking a toll somewhere. So I wanted to end this with a picture I actually took at Niagara Falls. If you've never been, go. It is one of those world things that you just have to see. And this was at a smaller fall in the falls, but it is a picture of a rainbow. And one thing that I hold on to in this work, because it gets heavy and it can take a physical toll on your body. And I remain a hold to hope. And I'm like, without hope, I don't think that I can continue this journey and do this work. And so a rainbow reminds me to keep that hope, keep that centered, even on days when it gets hard. So I want to take everyone through just 2 deep breaths to release this so that you don't hold this energy in your body. So if you could with me, take 1 deep breath in and out. Another deep breath in and out. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will follow up with the recording of this webinar and any resources that were mentioned in the chat box. We thank you all so much and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.